Okay, so you've just heard from 5 very different and exciting examples of eco-districts, and one of the things that struck me, I had the opportunity to spend all of today with these projects in a somewhat deeper conversation, and at the Portland Sustainability Institute, leading the eco-districts program, we are constantly getting flooded with questions from cities around the country and really all over the world asking, how do we create an eco-districts program to encourage projects like this to develop in our city? And here in DC, you're fortunate to have these 5 very different and somewhat organic projects organized by different kinds of institutions sort of developing around eco-districts in a somewhat informal way. I mean, there's certainly some coordination across them, but without any sort of major policy or initiative of the city, you've had sort of this growth of eco-districts. So it's very exciting. So given that there's a lot of issues in creating eco-districts, it's sort of a new way of doing business and work at the neighborhood scale. There's issues of policy and assessment and measuring performance and local governance. So I'm curious, in your work to date, what have been sort of the biggest challenges or obstacles that you've had to overcome or are working to overcome? And feel free, we've got 5 panelists and not much time, so if a few of you want to sort of respond, go for it. No need for everyone to try to chime in.
Scott, you first. Our biggest challenge has really been to identify what are the baselines and the starting point of what are the conditions within our large geography. Unlike the other, most of the other eco-districts, we're working with multiple owners where our role is how to figure out what their drivers are. One of our big surprises has been that we've seen that the owner-occupied buildings by associations or unions, those are the ones that have some of the greatest opportunities because they focused on their mission as opposed to their facilities. So the facilities now provide a great opportunity for them to find more funding for their missions.
What's interesting, our biggest challenge, I think, right now is time. Like, things are happening in our eco-district, and it was interesting, I was talking with somebody from JBG today, and they were just like, you need to tell us if we need to hook into this cogeneration plant because we need to, change our transformers, and if we don't want to spend millions of dollars doing this, if you guys are, and so we need the coordination and the phasing of, these district projects and getting the word out, and I think, getting everyone involved at the table so they all understand sort of what's in store for this area so they can, capture that in their development plans. So it's both a challenge. I mean, it's exciting, but it is challenging.
About some thoughts on that. I think one of our biggest challenges has been to get lenders and developers that we work with to, rethink how projects are financed and how they're operated, and to look at waste not as waste but as an asset. And I'll give you a specific example. I'd asked my colleagues at DDOE last year to run a stormwater model on one of our sites and to calculate how much stormwater we could capture and reuse potentially in a cogen system. And their calculation was we could save $326,000 a year in utility fees that would otherwise go to DC Water. And that's $326,000 that I could use to get better terms on our debt, to roll into the next phase of the project, to provide better services particularly for the low-income residents that are going to live in our projects. But getting from that idea that waste is not waste, it's an asset that can be reinvested, I think has been the toughest piece.
I have a couple of challenges I just want to highlight. For district energy, I had mentioned district energy was one of the things we're looking at. We currently don't have a district energy system. We're currently built out. We're an urban environment, and so installing those pipes in an already built out area, we're facing those challenges and working together across all departments to coordinate that effort. Also, 60% or more of the buildings that are out there right now in Arlington will still be around in 2050. So that means making those existing buildings more energy efficient. And our goals are anywhere from 30 to 50%, depending on the type of building that we're talking about, the energy efficiency goals compared to where we are now. And that is a significant challenge. And that gets into financing and coming up with financial incentives for the owners of those buildings to try and get them to those goals. And then lastly, I'll mention that we are a Dillon's Rule state. And for those of you who are planners, you may know this already, but what the state says Arlington County and other jurisdictions in the state can do, we can do. Otherwise, we can't do it. And we have to be innovative and imaginative on how we collaborate and work together with the private sector in order to make the economic business case.
For UDC, beyond the obvious challenges of resources and data collection, I think our biggest challenge is debunking the myth that is still prevailing in some circles that sustainability is more expensive than the status quo. And so if you're only looking at the initial cost of investment, you might take that view, but shifting the cultural conversation at an institution that never looked at sustainability before is probably our biggest challenge.
Great. So given that these are the early days of eco-districts in DC and everywhere really, where you've laid out some pretty ambitious plans, but where in 5 to 10 years, where will you be? What will your districts feel like? Is it equally about projects in the ground as it is about sort of capacity and governance? And where will you, what will make you feel successful in 10 years, let's say?
I'll take a crack at it. Financial incentive programs that I mentioned before, having those up and running, and they will be varied, but making sure those are up and running and those resources are available for homeowners, building owners, and the like. Also, having that district energy system in place, having a district energy company, operating it and rolling that out, and eventually past 2020 connecting multiple nodes of that system would be my fantasy, my goal.
I think that this is going to be the norm. I mean, we actually, if you think about it, there are hospitals, military bases, university campuses that are being run more or less under this model and have been so for many years and decades in some cases. So I think this is going to be the norm. And I wish I could say it's because we're all really persuasive and creative, and I think that maybe we can take some credit with Posey, but I think part of what's going to drive this is crisis. It's going to be oil prices, natural gas prices, water prices. It's going to force developers, engineers, architects, city planners to rethink how we build.
I would say from my perspective, it's having our student center completed and our 600-bed dormitory, which is planned, completed, and that all of the existing buildings will be renovated in a way that moves them towards high performance, and that we graduate students that are all environmentally competent.
And I think from the Southwest eco-districts and, from our perspective, one of the things that's really important for us here at NCPC is to show that the federal government actually can be a great neighbor and we can contribute to a really vibrant community here. And I think we're starting to see some of that, with some, GSA's new headquarters, we have retail on the ground floor, that sort of thing, which is sort of changing the way that the federal government is a property owner here in DC. And so I want us to look like we're sort of integrated into this neighborhood.
I'd hope that we've far exceeded our goals for the Better Buildings Challenge, that we've met that 20% reduction, and that we've actually put ourselves out of business and we're no longer needing a bunch of individual eco-districts, that it is the eco-district of Columbia.
That's good.
That's a great answer. I mean, we often say as well at Posey in our work around eco-districts, our goal is to work ourselves out of a job, right? To have all of these neighborhoods sort of with the capacity and expertise and structure to do this work. And so that kind of seeds my next question. I mean, these are all great visions. So given that, a lot of the thinking around eco-districts come from sort of our experience and now expertise around green building, how do eco-districts scale across the city? I mean, what is sort of the ultimate goal? Is it sort of policy adoption, widespread sort of commitment of every neighborhood identifying as an eco-district? Is every neighborhood an eco-district? This sort of issue of how we take eco-districts to the next scale going forward is a big one that we wrestle with in our work. So I'm sort of curious on your thoughts about how eco-districts scale up across DC.
One of those projects is a top-down project. So
That's an interesting point.
It's not like the things you talked about.
Yeah, it's true. It's different, yeah.
Very true.
So yeah, so maybe a critical question about that, and it's something that we talked about today, is how do you build in a governance structure that really engages other folks in the community as part of that scaling? So,
Well, I think at the university we are moving in that direction. We have been partnering with a group of concerned citizens that were first initially brought together through a planning process started by the DC Office of Planning, known as NCIP, probably the worst planning acronym ever created. And so, but the long and short of that is that it started to galvanize people around this idea of looking at specific sustainability outcomes. And so we have been, trying to be a good partner and a collaborator and a facilitator of more citizen engagement around the key themes of that effort, and growing and expanding on that. I think all neighborhoods across the city could benefit from the implementation of eco-district attributes, if not, full-blown eco-district status.
Well, I would challenge that from our perspective, it isn't a top-down driven. We're responding to what are the needs of our stakeholders and what are their desires for what they'd like to see. They're actually the leaders here, and what our role is really to help facilitate and to provide some catalysts so that they can serve as examples that help to spread across the entire district for those that don't necessarily have the technical expertise of some of those that do.
I would echo what Scott just said. There was a federal commission and did its work for many years, but actually what the law requires is that there is extensive ongoing collaboration, not just consultation, not just giving folks a bunch of ideas and sort of going through the motions. So much of what is reflected in the Walter Reed Plan has come from not just the community leaders who are on the LRA, but the community itself, really informing and will continue to inform what is designed, what is built, how it works for them. And to Naomi's earlier question, there is a lot of policy that will have to change on emissions, on building materials, on black water reuse. And many of those policies will actually directly benefit communities, either in the quality of their life or through job creation.
And in Arlington, we had a task force of about 29 people, community leaders from all different sectors, private sector, public sector, and so forth, who actually, it was their task force report that they brought forward with those greenhouse gas emissions and a total of 17 recommendations and strategies, including the big, hairy, audacious goal of 2050 of 3.0 metric tons. And so it was their goal, and they had the choice. In March 2010, we gave them the choice. We said, either you make it transformative or incremental. It's up to you. And they chose transformative, and they said, make it transformative, and we're carrying the water. That's what we're doing. Also, we kind of flipped it on its head, the planning process. So the community energy plan is all 26 square miles of Arlington County. It's not just county operations. It's every building, all homes, all across all of Arlington County. And so with that, we are now diving into the more district level sort of planning. And in Crystal City, we're doing an integrated energy master plan. The results of that will be done in July, and that will be probably our first foray into a smaller scale sort of effort to try and figure out energy efficiency, use, and district energy feasibility at that more localized neighborhood scale level.
Great. Well, I'll just add sort of a few thoughts on the scaling question, because it's one that we get all the time. And from our perspective in Portland, what we're really trying to figure out through this pilot program and these 5 pilot neighborhoods is figure out what works and what doesn't. And some things are going to work at the neighborhood scale, like governance and district energy, for example, if we can prove it. And they make sense to sort of stay at that district scale, right? That's kind of the scale that they optimize at. Whereas other sort of eco-district approaches, like how you measure sustainability and the kinds of policies that are then adopted citywide, are ultimately institutionalized by a city or another institution. And that's sort of, from our perspective, what kind of how we sort of answer the scaling question, right? We're through these pilot programs and through these 5 neighborhoods, you're figuring out in essence what works and what doesn't, and what makes sense at that neighborhood scale, and then what sort of makes sense across the city. And ultimately, I think the goal for all of us doing this work is sustainable cities, right? Eco cities, not just eco districts. But I think it's sort of an interesting conversation that will continue as more and more folks take on these sort of neighborhood scale sustainability projects. So we have a few minutes left, and I guess just sort of the last question before sort of before a few words of wrap up is just kind of what's been the biggest surprise? There aren't a lot of people doing this work, and in the conversations we have, people are really surprised by some of what they're finding.
in Arlington, we presented the task force with initial modeling results that said we could get down to 4.5 metric tons by 2050. We also told them that Copenhagen has already gotten down to 3.0. And so we presented that information to them, and they said we can do better than that. They felt challenged, and they kind of stood up. And as a group, and this was a consensus, all 29 members across the board said we can do better, we should do better, and let's revisit that. So we went back to the drawing board, looked at transportation policies, presented more information to them, and they set the final goal at 3.0. So getting back to what staff wants to do versus what the community wants to do, the community said, let's do even better, and we challenge you to do so. And that's when I mentioned challenges. They're ahead of us, but I also look at them as opportunities.
I think for us, the biggest surprise so far has been, well, one, interest, which has just been really great, that everyone seems genuinely interested in doing these projects. And the other one is that there's really, I mean, it appears to be that there's a business case for some of these, that these proposals are, they're great that they're about sustainability, and we're going to achieve a lot from a sustainability perspective, but they can actually make money too and not cost us more money. So I think that has been really great, and it validates a lot of what we're doing.
I guess the biggest surprise has been seeing how innovative so many of our stakeholders already are. They're coming up with ideas that we'd never even contemplated, and they've already implemented them. And so the fact that there is so much activity already occurring, that it makes our role of just sharing that information that much easier, so that it's something that I'm very confident that we're going to be very pleasantly surprised with how quickly we advance as a city.
I think the biggest surprise for me has been the level of interest in institutions or individuals willing to partner and give back to the university. I've met a number of residents, graduates of UDC, folks who have lived across the street from UDC in the apartments and have never ventured on the campus before until we initiated some of the activities with our sustainability effort. So I think people's willingness to be supportive of the state university has been the biggest surprise, and also the support amongst the 9 major universities in Washington, D.C. Last month, along with Mayor Gray, we signed the College and University Sustainability Pledge. So all of the major universities in the District of Columbia are pushing the envelope in terms of sustainability practices and outcomes. And we are beginning to be noticed and identified as a leader in sustainability, maybe not to the degree of Portland, but we're going to give Portland a run for the money.
So the biggest surprise for me is when I started working on this really some years ago, but particularly when I got to the deputy mayor's office, was one of my goals is just try to reduce our operating expenses, because all of our projects are very complicated. There's always a big piece that is dedicated to affordable housing, and so those are difficult to pay for, basically, and we're running out of subsidy to pay for those projects. So initially my goal was to try to reduce costs, and what I've been surprised about is the degree to which lenders and investors, not really your conventional lenders, not the sort of big 5, but private investors and lenders and infrastructure providers are in this space because they see that there's money to be made. And so they're happy to come on, build it, own it, run it for you, and to do something that is really unconventional, because from their perspective, there is money to be made by advancing these goals. And so that's really encouraging to me.
That's great. This is all very exciting. One of the things that the title of tonight's series is Washington's Emerging Ecodistricts. And one of the things that I think is really important to point out is that when doing this kind of sustainability work in existing neighborhoods, all the models we have are emerging. I mean, really, we've been working in this space for about 3 years now. There's a couple other programs, Seattle 2030 District, the Denver Living City Block, a few kind of initiatives and programs that are popping up, and then all these stellar example neighborhoods that are also, a couple years old. And so when we've held the ecodistrict summit the last 2 years, I think one of the themes has been, there's a lot of great examples of all new development, sort of brownfield and greenfield development that achieve really ambitious sustainability goals. but there aren't a lot of great examples of retrofitting existing cities to do this work. And so I think it's important. I mean, we're all sort of feel this sense of urgency, but it's also important to recognize that, you know, the green building movement, sort of one building at a time, really took a long time to mature, and that, you know, we're really only a couple years into this, and we've learned a lot. And the kinds of ambitious goals we have, you know, to 2050 and, you know, 2030 to 2060, you know, that's a long ways out, and there's a lot of sort of technologies and thinking that's going to evolve until then. And these really are the early days of eco-districts, and so it's been particularly encouraging and exciting for me doing this work to be working with you all in DC. The keynote at our summit last year, Jeb Bergman sort of coined this term that we've been using, a new community of eco-district practice. And so there's really sort of this new way of thinking and collaborating across disciplines and with cities around sort of, you know, how you retrofit existing cities to achieve these ambitious sustainability goals that we have. So it's exciting and inspiring for me, you know, as we work with cities all over to sort of have all of you in this new community of practice. And I'll just end with, you know, we're now developing a national eco-districts program. And so part of that is sort of designing the program and thinking through what are the kinds of issues and the challenges and the types of projects that cities like DC are wrestling with, and how can we, and, you know, sort of the expertise that you're building and a lot of the consulting expertise that's out there, how can we help sort of, you know, move this movement forward more quickly. So more to come on that, and I'm sure you'll hear a lot more sort of momentum from your local eco-district project. So thank you. I know that since we didn't have time for questions from the audience, folks are happy to stick around, and I think there's more refreshments. And I think everything available from tonight, the presentations and the film, will be up on NCPC's website. So with that, thank you, and thank you to all the panelists and NCPC for hosting.